interesting. I know not all of us love money or bacon, but how many of you like bacon? Do I have any bacon lovers out here? Yeah, it's like you can get hand claps for that. That's better than Michigan. Yeah, wait a second. Anyway, it's like when it comes to bacon, it's like we get excited about it. We want more bacon. We just don't want the mess. And I think the same thing is true with money. Like I've never met a person that's like, you know what? I've had enough money. I don't really need it. I'm good. I mean, we all want more, but what we don't want is the mess. And so if you came in today with a little bit of financial stress or a little bit of a financial mess, man, I am so glad that you're here. The first thing that I want you to do is just literally take a deep breath. Because here's what I know is true, and I know many of you have been around Cedar Creek for a little while, but church and guilt tend to go hand in hand. It's like, oh, I'm going to go to church, I'm going to be told I'm doing it all wrong, and they're going to say this, and I'm going to feel like an itty-bitty, insignificant human being by the time I leave. It's like that's some of your experience. If you're here for the first time or you're relatively new, it's like you just assume those two things go hand in hand, and when you add in money into the equation, that's an all-out spiritual panic attack. It's like, whoo, people don't sign up for this. And so if you could set all of that aside, I know for some people, their financial reality is painful and difficult, and sometimes it's embarrassing. So we don't talk about it. We're afraid to talk about it. We feel ashamed to talk about it. And I would love for you to it's okay to not be okay. It's okay if you're feeling like you're in a bit of a financial mess. It's okay if you feel like you don't know anything about finances. I'm not going to be pulling out a budget spreadsheet and walking through Excel in our time together, and I'm not going to pressure you to give to our church. I want to talk about your personal finances. I want to talk about ours, because I think there's a way to live financially free. We just finished a series on anxiety, and one of the number one causes of anxiety is our finances. So I want to talk about what it means to feed the pig. Not the literal pig, but like the piggy bank, like your finances. That's really why we named the series. Some of you are like, oh, I get it now. That's right, or maybe you'll get it on the way home. Feeding the pig means this. It's investing in the key money behaviors that will ultimately feed you. That money is really meant to add value to your life, not be a source of stress in your life. And so what are the key money behaviors? This is not a get-rich scheme, a pyramid scheme. This is not a magic button that you push and you win the lottery and it just rains money in your life. No, these are practical behaviors that when you live them out will add value to your life, even if it doesn't accumulate in a lot of zeros to your net worth. Here's the way that this ancient Jewish proverb, which is our theme verse for the series, describes it. It says, the wise store up choice food and olive oil, but the fool gulps theirs down. I don't care whether you're young or you're a student you're watching, if you can begin to learn the principles of wisdom, there will be a storage of choice food and olive oil. In other words, you will invest in the key money behaviors that will ultimately feed you. So you could be wise, or you could be a fool. And a fool just gulps down whatever they get. A fool lives paycheck to paycheck. A fool has no idea where they're at. And I don't say that to make you feel bad. I'm just pointing out this is the way that the ancient Jewish proverb describes two different categories of people. And here's the good news. If up to this point you've been feeling or living a little foolishly, that's okay. That's okay. Look at that and let's move from the place where you're gulping everything down to where you're investing in those key money behaviors that will ultimately feed you. I mean, I wasn't always where I wanted to be at, and that's all right, man. Let's move together. When you think about, though, farming, pig farming, and finances, there are some connections or correlation. For example, if you're going to think about farming and feeding pigs, you don't just start with feeding the pig. You got to start with getting the pig. You don't just make it. It doesn't just show up. You've either got to buy it or you've got to breed it. The pig has to come from somewhere, and then when it shows up, you got to feed the pig. You can't just send it out into the neighborhood hoping it finds its own meal. No, you actually have to provide Or set aside some specific plan to feed the pig. Then I tried to think of words to describe this. I called it spend the pig. You got to send it out. I think you can get the gist of what I'm referring to here for those of you that feel a little sensitive about pig love. You know, if you're a pig lover. Why? Why do you send out the pig? So that you can share the bacon. That's right. Come on, that's what it's for. And I think we all want a little more bacon. Same is true with finances. There are 4 key money behaviors that we have to think about, that you have to invest in. Here they are. You've got to think about your earning, getting the pig. It's got to come from somewhere. You got to get the investment from somewhere. You got to save. You got to feed the pig. You got to spend the money in your life. You got to think about that. And here's the thing. Typically, finance conversations start with cutting spending. I think that's a part of it, but what we don't talk about a whole lot is how to spend in ways that actually feed your life. We're going to talk about that in a few weeks. And then giving. Giving is another key money behavior that adds to your life. And some of you are like, what? I thought you just said you weren't going to talk about giving to the church. I didn't say giving to the church. But if you look up giving and well-being, Harvard, scientific studies, dozens of studies have scientifically proven that when you're generous, it adds to your overall well-being. I can't talk about key money behaviors without talking about one of the key ways that you and I experience something significant with our finances, and it's when we give. Giving makes you a more attractive person, period. Why? Because selfish people are obnoxious, okay? When you're out with friends and people are like, they're only thinking about themselves, I don't want to hang out with those kinds of people. I don't want to hire those kinds of people. But generous people are fun. Generosity is a key part of your overall financial picture. You got to think about it. You got to plan for it. You have to. And I personally think that giving here is one of the best financial giving investments that you can make. If you can find a better somewhere else, I would say go there. But giving needs to be a regular part of our life. And here's what's interesting. Some of you may not have realized this before, but money was one of Jesus' number 1 subjects that he talked about. It's actually number 2. His top subject was talking about the kingdom of God. What was life like, the way that God intended, or what is God inviting us to live? That's what the kingdom of God is all about. Number 2 was money. Think about this. It's ahead of loving your enemies and all of that, getting along with people. It's ahead of Bible reading. It's ahead of prayer. It's ahead of your purpose. Why? Why did Jesus talk about it so much? Was it because he was money hungry? No. Jesus knew this. He knew that where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Wherever it is that your heart is, you're going to put money there intrinsically. You can't help it. You're excited about it. There's a reason why I don't buy Michigan shirts. My heart ain't there, okay? But if your heart is, you're buying shirts that can get stinky. So it's great, It's like, great, go ahead, whatever. That means you get the idea. Here's the interesting thing. Even if your heart isn't there, you start putting your money there, you start paying attention to it. You start watching it a little bit more. You invest in a stock, maybe for those of you that have done this like I did when the stock market recession thing hit. I thought, you know what? I'll put a couple $100 in Ford stock. I never paid attention to stock in my life. You know what was happening? Every week, I was watching Ford stock. I was watching Ford stock. I was watching Ford stock. And then when I sold it, I haven't paid attention to Ford stock since. It's like, why? Because where your money goes, your heart goes. Where your heart is, your money goes. Jesus talked about this. Why? Because he cares about your heart. In other words, he's teaching us our bottom line for today and for our series. If you're taking notes, the bottom line is this. More money doesn't make life better. More money makes you more of who you already are. I'm going to say that again. More money doesn't make your life better. Some of you are thinking, well, I'd like to try that. A little more money would be kind of nice. I think it would make life better. The reality is, if you were to win the lottery today, it would just make you more of who you already are. Don't believe me? Google broke lottery winners. People who won the lottery, do you know what happened? If they were chronic spenders, if they spend more than they had, they just outspent their lottery winnings. You're like, well, I would never do that. Well, the statistics would say differently. If you're anxious with what you have now, you're going to be anxious with the more that you have. If you compare your finances to other people now, or wherever you're at socioeconomically to people now, even if you become a millionaire, a multimillionaire, you're just going to compare at a different level. Don't believe me? Google The Atlantic. The Atlantic did a research project, and the satisfaction of millionaires. It's an amazing article, and basically the more money you make, if all you do is compare yourself to others, you're just going to compare yourself at a different level, and you're just going to need to get more. You're going to want to beat them. Do you know Dave Ramsey, who spent his life studying people's financial trends and helping people financially? Do you know what he says the number one value is? Is people who are content. That's what leads to Why? Because if you're content with what you have now, the more money you get, look at this, the more content you will be. Oh, that's how that works. If you're experiencing financial peace now, if you add money, the more peace you will feel financially. So all money does is it just makes you more of who you already are. So I'm okay with you wanting more money, but not at the expense or being blind to who you already are. Don't assume that more money will make your life better, because it might not. Here's what the statistics tell us. The statistics tell us that only one third of U.S. households maintain a monthly budget, according to Gallup. That means 1/3, let's just say you represent the country, or U.S. households. 1 out of 3 of you who are watching, that means you and not the 2 people next to you, wherever they're at, think about the implication of that. That means only 1/3 of you actually know where your money is going. The other 2/3, you have no clue. You're just kind of hoping that it's there. It's like if you're a pig farmer, it's like you sent the pig out into the neighborhood and you just hope that it returns back to you. You don't have guardrails, you don't have a plan, you don't have a fence. It's just out there somewhere. You're not even really sure. That's an anxious way to live. Think about this. Only 3 out of 10 households, American households, are financially healthy, according to MarketWatch. What are the terms for being financially healthy? We're going to talk about that in the next couple days. The concern is there are only 3 out of 10. That means, again, 30%, less than a third, are financially healthy. Here's another one. 2/3 of U.S. households would struggle to cover a $1,000 crisis or emergency. Some of you could charge it, you could put it on a credit card, but you're not at a place where you would be able to cover that financially. You would have to, it would cause stress. And think about what that does to your life. It's assuming that you're never going to have an emergency or some sort of car repair or some sort of house repair or some sort of personal health expense that's going to come up. That's a foolish way to live. And you can get out of that. Think about this. Another study that I read, financial arguments are one of the most common forms of marital conflict according to every married person ever, okay? I mean, it may not be your number one argument, but it's a common form of conflict. In fact, where I did actually find some research on this, the Institute for Divorce Financial Analytics, that's a double cup of coffee read there, studies what happens in the case of a divorce. And money is one of the number one reasons for a divorce, and it's the number one thing talked about in a divorce. And it also leads to all sorts of personal financial struggles after the divorce. So let's just stop the whole let's not talk about money because it makes us uncomfortable and realize it needs to be a part of the marriage conversation. Why? Because you need it for a healthy marriage or a healthy relationship. But not only that, look at this. Your kids need it. Only 23% of kids say that they have regular money conversations with their parents. I ask this question on social media because I believe the number one determiner of your current financial reality is the way that you were raised. It's what your parents did or didn't do around you. And so if you want to make a generational difference, start learning how to talk about money. Jesus talked about it, you talked about it, and you need to start getting a picture of what is really going on. Why? Think about this in light of the series that we just finished. 74% of people indicate that debt impacts their overall mental health. Maybe the reason work is annoying or school is annoying or relationships are difficult is because you're showing up with financial stress. Or maybe some of the people that are difficult to work with or difficult to hang out with at school or at work or whatever, maybe they're carrying a lot of financial stress. So man, wouldn't it be cool if there was a different way to live? I believe that there is. I think that's why Jesus talked about it so much. Something needs to change. And The reason that this is so important to me is because if I say that you matter, and this is such, for me to stay silent on this would be to live the exact opposite of the reality that I'm trying to communicate, that we're trying to communicate. You matter. You matter to us. And so we need to talk about it. And so over the next couple of weeks, we are going to be looking at a parable that Jesus told. A parable is basically a short story with application to our everyday life. It's a short story with a purpose. And some of you have heard of this parable before. It's called the parable of the talents. If you haven't, the way that the parable is told is Jesus says that a master entrusts bags of silver, and they are given in the weight of the Greek term talent. It's not referring to your overall talents. It was a financial term because they couldn't keep the size of coins consistent. And so they weighed them. And so to the first guy, he gave a bag of 5 talents. Like think of it as 5 bags of silver. To the second person, he gave 2 bags or 2 talents of silver. To the third servant, he gave 1 bag, and then he left. And then after a period of time, a long time, he comes back to settle his account. And these servants give back, the first 2 double, and the last guy just buried into the ground. And to the first 2, he rewards. And the last one, he says some of the harshest things that Jesus ever recorded, some of the harshest language Jesus ever used. And some of you've heard this parable before, but here's the thing. The parable is meant to have all sorts of application to our whole life, not just our finances. It's to the way that you live, the way that you use your literal talents, the way that you use this life and this body that God has given you. But it also has incredible financial implication for all of us. And Jesus, here's what's interesting about it. Jesus gives us the end. He says, to those who use well what they are given, even more will be given. I mean, this is why Jesus is telling the whole parable, to help illuminate this. He says, to those who use well what they are given, even more they will have an abundance. I don't know about you, but I like the sound of that. That sounds kind of good. Tell me more. And he says, but from those of you who do nothing, even what little we have will be taken away. I think when we read this, the reason it gets our curiosity, whether you've heard it or not, is because we love the idea of having more. We're constantly trying to find ways to get some extra cash or some extra income, some more stuff in our life. We want more for paying less. We want an abundance. That's why we look for 50-50 raffles, or play the Powerball, or maybe even have a side hustle. We're always looking for ways to get a little bit more. In fact, it's talked about in sitcoms and shows and joked about, like it is in one of my favorite shows called The Office. So I couldn't help but show you a clip that illustrates this. Let's watch.
So, Phil, these cards, and now I am recruiting you.
Who is this guy again?
Don't worry about Phil. He drives a Corvette. He's doing just fine. Okay. Calling cards are the wave of the future. These things sell themselves.
Who uses calling cards anyway?
You know what? That's a nice attitude, Ryan. I'm just helping you invest in your future, my friend.
It sounds like a get-rich-quick scheme.
Yes, thank you. You will get rich quick. We all will.
Can you lose a lot of money on that one from the email?
You know what, Toby? When the son of the deposed king of Nigeria emails you directly asking for help, you help. His father ran the freaking country, okay? All right, so raise your hand if you want to get rich. All right.
No, how is this not a pyramid scheme?
All right, let me explain again. Phil has recruited me and another guy. Now, we are getting 3 people each. The more people that get involved, the more people who are investing, the more money we're all going to make. It's not a pyramid scheme. It's not even a scheme per se. It's... I have to go make a call.
Oh, I love that clip. I remember when I was in college at the University of Toledo, I got invited out to a guy's house in the suburbs. Nice house, nice car. And they were inviting me to be a part of their team where we would get others to sign up for their long-distance calling plan. I don't remember the name of it. Some of you were like, long-distance calling plan? Yeah, that's right. I'm ancient, okay? I remember those days. But I remember getting invited into those network marketing type, I don't want to call it a pyramid scheme, but those kinds of marketing schemes where it's like, you can get rich if you just get a couple of your friends and they get a couple. And we're always looking for ways to get more. That's why I think when some people look at this passage, this is where they focus. They think what Jesus is saying is focus on more. Focus on the focus here. Pray for this. Trust God for this. Have faith for this. And here's the thing. Jesus isn't opposed to more, but he does not want us focused on more. Why? Because he knows when you and I focus on more, it wrecks our life. Why? Because when more drives your life, you will never have enough. Period. When you just need a little bit more, you never get to the place where you have enough. Jesus isn't trying to get us to focus on more. No, what he wants us to focus on is to use well what you've been given. And then you'll experience more in your life. One word that's used there is to be faithful. Why? Because he knows more money will not make life better. Instead, learn how to be faithful. Learn how to be faithful with what you have. And when that's who you become, then more will be a part of your life. But on the other side of that, if you do nothing with what you've got, it's gonna feel like everything that you have is constantly falling through your fingers. And so the homework assignment, yes, there's going to be homework every week. And this is meant to be fun, clarifying homework assignment. I know some of you are eye-rolling, like talking about finance is never fun. But just bear with me, okay? This is your homework assignment. I'd love for you to write it down. You need to get clarity on what you have instead of comparing what you have not. I don't care whether you feel like you make any money or no money. I want you to get clarity on what you have, especially if you're a high school student. Think about what your parents are investing versus what you're investing in your life. Just get clarity on what you have versus what you have not. Because here's why this is so important. It is so easy for us to focus on what we have not. To go into school, to go into work and look at the cubicle next to you or the social media page and to see what they have and to go, well, I've got a long list of have-nots. And what you come to the conclusion is that you have not. And what you've lost sight of is what you have been given. To those who are faithful, to those who use well what they've been given, more will be added. That's the first step out of a financial mess, is to get clarity on what you have. And to help us go on that journey where we get a little bit of this personal clarity that will open the door to helpful progress, Jesus tells a story to help illustrate this. This is where he begins. He says, again, the kingdom of heaven can be illustrated, it's a parable, by the story of a man. He goes on a long trip. He calls together his servants, employees, and entrusts his money to them while he was gone. When people read this story, they think, first of all, kingdom of heaven is referring to future heaven. Like someday it's going to be like, no. Every time Jesus talked about the kingdom of heaven, he said, it is now. So what Jesus is illustrating or talking about is what life with God is meant to look like now and in the future. And so he's illustrating what God is inviting us into now. That God is like a master, and God has trusted, let go of, invested, given you and me something that we need to get clarity on. So truth number one that is being illustrated in this story is that God is rich and generous. That he is the master. That he has an enormous amount of resources, as you start to hear when he unpacks the bags of talents, and that he's generous. Most people think that God is one or the other. They think he's rich, but he's very stingy. He's not giving me what I feel like I need or deserve or whatever. Or that he's generous and he's gracious, but he doesn't seem to be very rich. And here's the problem. When you lose sight of that, you develop a scarcity mindset. And a scarcity mindset creates conflict. When you have a scarcity mindset, you're afraid that there's never going to be enough. And so what happens when you have a scarcity mindset is you start to look at everything that you have as yours. And it's in competition or being threatened by everybody else. And so when I look at my life and I look at my finances and I look at my resources and I go, these are mine, and everything else is a threat, then even God becomes a threat. And this begins to create the mess of financial stress. But when you believe that God is a father, a master who cares about you, who you matter to him, and that he's rich and that he's generous, you begin to develop a bit of an abundance perspective. It changes the way you look at what you have. Instead of it being yours, you begin to see that everything that you have has been given to you from him. It's not yours. Now, some of you are like, but Ben, do you know how many hours I put into working on? Do you know how many years I've invested to get to where I'm at today? This is all mine. Time out. I understand that you've worked. I understand that you've worked hard to get to where you're at today, but who gave you the money to work hard? Who gave you the skills to work hard? Who decided that you would be born in this country, into your family, into these opportunities, into this era in human history? Did you decide all of that? Did you pick that? Did you make it? No. See, you can't take credit for your whole life. And so either you believe that God is rich and generous and put you where you're at today, and is in part entrusted some things to you. Not all of the things that have happened to you. I'm not saying that he's entrusted all of the bad. But he's given you some things today. When you begin to see that, man, it opens your eyes on what you have, and it brings clarity on what you should do with it. You got to know that God is rich and generous. So instead of blaming God, instead of having a scarcity mindset, acknowledge him first. Then, as he goes on, here's what you begin to see. And this is hard. I'm going to acknowledge this is hard for some of us as we begin to think about its implication in our lives. Look at what the master does. He gave 5 bags of silver to one, 2 bags to another, and 1 bag of silver to the last, dividing it in proportion to what? Their abilities. He then left on his trip. I love it. God's not a micromanager, okay? This master invested and walked away. He didn't sit there and penny pinch. He didn't sit there, hover over their shoulder and go, oh, you shouldn't do that, you shouldn't do that. Don't do so. That sometimes we think that's what God is doing in our financial life, that he's hovering over our shoulder, when in reality, he's invested. You have life. You've been brought here. Why? Because he believes you are capable of doing something with that investment. That's what this parable teaches us, that God is rich and generous, and he believes in you. But what it also shows us is a truth that we don't know. God does not invest equally. That's what makes us uncomfortable. Is to some he gives 5, to others he gives 2, and to some he gives 1. Now this is not a small amount. He's invested his resources into these servants. But some of us who feel like we have been given 2, we feel like God isn't being fair because he didn't give us 5. We sit here and we're like, God, it's not very fair that I have 2 and you gave some of those other people 5. And essentially we want God to be fair, and yet we sing songs about God's amazing grace. Do you know what grace is all about? Grace is about not getting what you deserve. Yeah, I celebrate the fact that God is not fair. If God were fair, it would impact all of us very negatively. No, God is gracious. You see, what we really want when we say God is fair is we want God to give us what the next level up has. Why? Because we are spending our life comparing ourselves to them. Do you know comparison creates conflict? When you start to compare what you have or have not with other people, it creates discontent. And when discontentment becomes who you are, more money isn't going to solve that. You're just going to compare at a different level. So we don't like the fact that God gives unequally, and we come to the conclusion, like many people in Jesus' audiences, that God is playing favorites. We think that he likes those people more than he likes us. And that's not what the master does. Look at what happens next. This was so interesting to me. The servant who received 5 bags of silver began to invest the money and earned 5 more. They went to work. They took time. This wasn't an overnight success, but he took 5, made it 10. The servant with 2 bags of silver went to work and earned 2 more. He took 2, he made it 4. But what's interesting to me is when the master comes back, he is not playing favorites. He says the exact same thing to both. Look at what he says. The master said to both the exact same thing. Well done, my good and faithful servant. You've been faithful in handling this small amount, so now I will give you many more responsibilities. This is my favorite line. Let's celebrate that together. Let's take a moment and enjoy what we have today. To the one who made 5, 10, he goes, well done. great job, let's celebrate. To the one who took 2 to 4, he didn't say, you know what, did you see what the guy who made 10 did? He's really special to me. No, he said the same thing. Why? Because God celebrates faithfulness equally. Why? Because he knows if you take 2 and you're faithful with the 2 that he's given and you make 4, then you'll take the 4 and with his help you'll make it 8, and then with 8 that can become 16. He wants you to become a person who's faithful, and then more will just be a byproduct of that in your life. He's not comparing what you have, he's comparing what you do with what you have. We spend so much time comparing what we have and have not, instead of learning how to be faithful with what we've been given. And what this does is this takes some of the pressure off. God isn't looking at final amounts. He's looking for faithful people. Why? Because here's what he said. To those who use well what they are given, even more will be given. And they will have in abundance. The problem is when we get caught up in a scarcity mindset, or when we start comparing, or when the pressure goes up, it puts us in financial paralysis. Or we just hit the eject button, we stop thinking about it altogether. And so we end up doing nothing instead of using well what we've been given. And that's why even what little we have feels like it's taken away. God wants to help us by giving us a path. And where it all begins, the first mess out of financial stress I've already described to you, is it's just to get clarity on what you've been given. It's to look and go, God has given me my life. He's given me some abilities. Let me get clarity on where I am at instead of comparing what I have not to everybody else. I want to look at what I have financially as opposed to comparing what I have not to everybody else. And here's what that looks like. Take these 4 areas, earning, saving, spending, and giving, and I want you to go home and get clarity on that. I want you to go home. If you're married, I want you to sit around the table. If you need to, give yourself a little incentive like some ice cream and fresh baked cookies or something to make this conversation a little less awkward, and just get clarity, not give judgment about what you think the other person is doing or where you're at. This is not an opportunity for you to should on yourself, okay? That's a different conversation. We talked about that a couple weeks ago. And in fact, in order to help you out, we're going to give you a tool, okay? So when you go home and you get a little clarity on where you're earning and where you're saving and where's your spending today, just get clarity on where that's at. Do you have percentages here? Do you know where your money is going? Are you giving anywhere other than like the $5 to the person who said they needed? Get clarity here. This is not an opportunity for you to look at someone and go, you spend that much on doing your hair? You spend that much on football games? Okay, so we're going to give you a tool to help with that. If it gets into a should conversation on your way out,